It was my first year at Yeshiva University as a freshman, maybe 19 or 20 years old. This is a Jewish university that combines secular studies and Hebraic studies. I was at this point in my life where I earnestly wanted to become an honest person. I think throughout my whole life, that's been sort of on different layers, an ongoing place for me, an ongoing edge of growth, wanting to be more congruent, wanting to be more honest. And the way this was expressing then was I was coming from a particular religious cultural orientation. And I wanted to know if this was true, if my beliefs about Judaism and the Torah were true. I needed to figure it out. And I got to a point where I couldn't just settle for any kind of abstract answer. I needed to know for myself. And I did something at that time that until then I had never done, but became one of the most important decisions I've ever made in my life. And I think this has sort of cycled itself in different phases along this journey of seeking to become an honest person. And I imagine it will continue. I looked at the Torah, the Tanakh, the Old Testament in Hebrew, the Jewish Bible, and I endeavored to look at it from the very beginning, starting with Bereshit, starting with Genesis, without any filter, without any commentary, without any preconception of what I would find when I would look at it. And that sounds simple enough, but in my learning, you really don't look at Torah without the aid of the Perushim, the commentators, because the idea is they know a lot more. You can really get lost on your own. You want to, be guided by the interpretation, the explanation, the clarification that would come from those that were offering their commentary on the Torah. And the Torah specifically is the 5 books of Moses. So I was starting there with the first book, but I wanted to look at it on its own in the Hebrew. And I even marked, I think, in a pencil, which is kind of sort of a taboo thing to do. But I wanted to look at it on my own without any other voice, any other thought. I remembered some years earlier in the summer, I was a part of a boys' Torah learning program. And I asked one of the counselors there if I could argue with Rashi being this medieval commentator that's totally regarded. They say he had Ruach HaKodesh, that he would receive the Holy Spirit and have vision for what to say. And generally, reading the Torah isn't done without Rashi and others of the likes to guide us in the right way to look at things. But I asked, can I come up with my own understanding? And the counselor said, who the hell are you to argue with Rashi? It was a powerful statement, right? I remember that moment, even then in high school, I was kind of in this transitional point of beginning to question, really accessing these parts of my being that didn't feel totally congruent. I remember being very curious. I'm like, who am I to argue with Rashi? Can I do that? What gives him the authority and what depletes me of that? Like, I wanted to know, at what point am I then eligible to come up with my own insight? So coming back to this story, I'm looking through the Tanakh, and I was really hoping, I did have an emotional attachment to coming up with a certain conclusive, like the Torah is written by God, and as a Jew, this is how I'm supposed to live. I really wanted to come up to that, but I also knew that I had to be open to anything that I would find. Like, I couldn't bring that preference into my seeking, into my learning, right? So I'm looking through it, and I ended up writing this very long term paper. I wish I still had it. What I concluded was, I can't know. What I concluded was, yeah, there are all these different languaging inconsistencies, and it looks like God is written in the plural form at a certain point, and how it's described changes in different times. A lot of interesting thing around angels and other beings, and there's a lot of mystical components, but then a lot of things that feel very much subjective, written by people and through a particular filter. And hey, this morally, ethically doesn't even feel true for me. And I got to a point simply where it was a mixed bag of many things, right? And with that mixed bag, I couldn't fabricate an authentic conclusion that said, and thus I must feel and believe this about it. Some parts of it really resonated, some parts didn't. And that was the answer. I'm like, well, that's what I know. And that was very hard for me. It was very disillusioning. It was a part of a longer process of kind of unraveling my beliefs. There have been many moments along this journey, both in relation to Judaism, but I think in relation to just different layers of unraveling greater truthfulness, where I've found myself just kind of looking at it with an honest orientation. Enter Jupiter in Gemini. What I'm describing is very much a Jupiter process. I often think of Jupiter and speak of Jupiter as where life is a spiritual journey, this pilgrimage of ongoing expansion and growth. It promises more insight, more direct realization. When we're having more direct realization, we're realizing more about the nature of reality. And I've spoken in the recent video on this idea that reality itself, from the point of view of Neptune, is what it is. And it's kind of beyond understanding, beyond comprehension. When we look at Jupiter, we're not trying to encompass all of it, because you can't encompass all of it. We're gradually awakening to more dimensionality of it. We're apprehending and understanding, cultivating more direct insight into the nature of whatever this is. And that expansive journey of realization is going to happen in a unique way for each one of us. And we'll be drawn to different cosmological frameworks or systems at different times that are going to offer a unique path or angle through which we'll apprehend more of the truth. But the key on this journey of ongoing expansion and realization is that when we're learning something, it's not in its essence conceptual and abstract. It's direct, it's known. And with Jupiter, there's a very foundational difference that we often miss between a belief or an idea versus direct knowledge and experience. What's directly known is directly known. Our filter or framework of articulating that will be subjective according to our own personal makeup, our own nature. We're all unique in our own way. We're going to frame our experiences and think about it according to our own cultural and social conditioning, etc. But the knowledge itself is indigenous to our own experience, and it's irrefutable. That's sort of the metaphor I've given of the taste of orange juice. You can't refute it. So when I'm teaching about Jupiter, I'm really speaking about sincerity. I find for myself, and I think for many of us, total sincerity, like actually being an authentic and sincere person, is harder than we often might want to believe. On this Jupiter pilgrimage journey of expansion and growth, we can't bring a whole bunch of ideas and beliefs and preconceptions about what we're supposed to learn and how it's supposed to go. To learn something, we have to not know it first, right? To arrive somewhere, we have to not already be there. There has to be a spaciousness and a sort of openness to experience. And, we might go through phases in life, sort of metaphorically in that adolescence of just openness, right? We haven't learned a whole bunch of things yet. So a child asks a question and they don't have a bunch of philosophical, like what's God? What happens when you die? The whole world is open. The whole universe is open. There aren't a lot of beliefs and ideas already crystallized that logically say this is what's going on in the world, right? Maybe there comes a certain point where we have an experience, and that experience accidentally becomes a religion. And instead of being available for an ongoing expansion of insight, we're trying to replicate that experience. I realized that already, so I'm here on this journey, but I've already realized it all. So this cultivation of sincerity is so important because it means an honest looking for the first time. So this is my introduction to Jupiter in Gemini. Because what happens with Jupiter in Gemini, we're combining the Sagittarius and the Gemini, the Mercury and the Jupiter archetype here. Essentially, anything can be logically argued as true. Look at religions. You can look at a book and prove anything to be true, not because the book proves it, but because of your implicit bias to make it so. We can skew together all the facts and data of our life to conclude anything that we want to believe is true, and the data will in fact support that. Logic doesn't mean sanity. Logic doesn't mean sincerity or authenticity or honesty. Logic can be anything at all. And I think the challenge with Jupiter in Gemini is allowing the mind to enter into a state of emptiness and openness, to become truly a beginner, to become a beginner's mind. This allows us to look at our experiences without already knowing what we're supposed to learn. I mean, this sounds so simple, right? To study something means you haven't yet learned that thing that you're studying. And so you're on this journey. Like imagine going to school or university or some sort of higher study, let's say, right? That's a metaphor for all of us right now, there's greater insight and perspective and realizations, logically, more of the pieces want to be put together. We're going to start seeing how this over here and this over here and this over here are all a part of this larger holistic story unfolding. But to be on this university of higher learning, there needs to be the studiousness and the honesty and the sincerity to actually read. Take notes. Ask critical questions. Don't accept answers on blind faith. Now let's think about where can we apply this in our own life. Remembering that it's harder than we realize to catch the tendencies for dishonesty and sincerity. It's very easy to actually settle for something we don't really know, but, our teacher told us that, right? Or Rashi said that, or my spiritual teacher said it. Okay, great, but do you know it? It's very easy to kind of forego our own agency and freedom of mind to think with honesty and sincerity, because this person who's had a great degree of spiritual realization and insight told me, well, this awakened being wrote the spiritual book, or my teacher who's an expert said this to me. But this is one of the issues. When we have Jupiter and Gemini, we can have a lot of struggles around this whole student-teacher dynamic. Does the teacher know more than you? No, not necessarily. Is the teacher necessarily sincere and authentic? No, not necessarily. Is it likely they've had realizations that perhaps you haven't had? Yes. Have they cultivated insight that they've been to places and experiences that they've had that they can then offer guidance and insight? Yes. But is their path your path? No. And anytime we find ourselves tempted to believe in something that we don't actually directly know, we need to check ourselves. This is a big part of what Jupiter and Gemini wants us to do. So with that, the intention here with Jupiter and Gemini is to recognize there are ways of thinking, questions to ask, that by the nature of these questions will open up doors of perception and insight that will teach me something I don't know. Questions are the keys to unlock the answers. Most of our questions don't want answers. Most of our questions unconsciously are setting ourselves up to repeat the thing that we've already decided that we know and want to know and don't want to challenge. Most of our questions are not available for learning. But the kind of question that is, you can feel it inside, isn't held back by a preconception or an attachment to outcome. And honestly, how often do we ask questions without attachment to outcome? Most of the time, we're hoping for a certain kind of outcome. So there's an immense amount of honesty and sincerity. You can think of it as intellectual honesty. That can be the catchphrase for Jupiter and Gemini. Intellectual honesty, intellectual sincerity. Being authentic with our questioning. This has the potential to bring forward perspectives and insights and also pathways that we didn't consider. When we're really open to learn, we're going to find ourselves having conversations and going on the pilgrimage, the metaphorical or literal pilgrimage, with teachers, books, content that maybe we never thought of before. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like if you've been walking down this one path, let's say walking down a particular evolutionary astrology path and kind of more of a non-dual spiritual cosmology, whatever, there might be this like more scientific, atheistic orientation that might actually give you something that will completely open up your world. If prayer is your orientation, there might be a completely different perspective and cosmological framework, thus, right, a way of logically ordering reality. Anything you're going to learn about from a Jupiter and Gemini perspective is going to represent a different way of putting it all together, right? If you are following an allopathic medical system, thus organizing and forming a cosmological understanding of the body from a particular lens, philosophical lens, a Taoist or Ayurvedic cosmological reference point might add something that will completely expand and open up your journey in ways you couldn't have imagined, right? Like allopathic versus Ayurvedic, completely different frameworks, same body. Hellenistic astrology and evolutionary astrology, both astrology, but it's looking at the same thing from different angles. And the availability to open to and hear. So Gemini is the physiology of hearing, right? to hear thoughts you've never heard before, to actually expand the framework of your understanding of reality. It's going to make your experience and your understanding of who you are and your life a lot more honest, a lot more sincere. And I share this example of Hellenistic and evolutionary astrology because my friend Adam Ellenbass, who I'm sure many of you follow, who teaches Hellenistic astrology, we are going to be doing a series very soon on the contrast and the similarities and just like the richness of discussion between an evolutionary astrologer and a Hellenistic astrologer. And this is like the gem of Jupiter and Gemini. I'm going to learn so much. And I think if we approach that with an open mind, there's going to be so much learning because the evolutionary astrology framework is a very particular framework. And it doesn't render other frameworks as wrong. It just has its own particular orientation. Jupiter and Gemini will oftentimes bring forward two different paths or two different perspectives or even like two different topics that seemingly have nothing to do with each other. And by synthesizing or working with them together, it will embellish and enhance and expand each in its own right. And this is a part of just the communication or the transmigration of ideas and insights. If we're truly available to hear thoughts we've never heard before, to think thoughts we've never thought before, to experience new logical conclusions, it will only further enhance and expand whatever path we are already on. So Jupiter and Gemini can be confusing in the sense that, well, there are many paths out there. Which astrology system do I follow? Which medical system do I follow? What perspective or orientation do I want to follow? Because really, depending on how we're thinking of life and our underlying beliefs, we're going to be seeking all kinds of intellectual pathways of learning accordingly. We can easily ask a question and ask 20 different people on different paths and potentially get very radically different answers. So the point is, not one of these paths offer the complete answer. There might be something that our soul resonates with, is drawn to, that we will feel is right for us, and we'll take it and we'll go with it. But if there's an internal sense of dissatisfaction, if in our own sincerity, we don't feel that we've landed in an honest place, we haven't arrived at the understanding that we are seeking. And how do you know when you've come into understanding? Again, it's the taste of orange juice. It means that the answers that we're getting are not the end of the journey. There's more to look at. And so we have to follow our draw, follow the exploration, follow the trail of your own curiosity, and to be open to where that takes us. Where there might be confusion or a disarray of different ideas or perspectives, don't try to find the right one. Don't try to convince yourself or figure out what's the path. Here's an example of this. Many students of astrology will struggle with, well, many things, right? Like what system of astrology, even sidereal or tropical, right? If you pick one, what house system or what cosmology? If you're doing tropical astrology, well, is it evolutionary? Is it shamanic? Is it Hellenistic? Is it all the other kinds, right? There are so many different pathways, even within a particular path, so to speak, right? And I would say there's way too much divisiveness. Like there's way too much, I'm right, and here's why. Here's why this house system is the right one. No one knows. Like from that Neptunian Pisces perspective, no one actually understands what this whole thing is anyway, right? It's like we're all kind of just like working it. None of us grasp the full reality of it. And none of us really understand how astrology works in the first place. Like we grasp that it does, as within, so without, as above, so below. And I think that's pretty much it. The rest of it is just observing it and correlating and studying and learning more about this reality. But it's like, wow, like the full intelligence of this whole experience is beyond all of us pretty much. Like very few souls comprehend that dimension of intelligence, right? So to argue over correct systems is really kind of funny if you think about it from that perspective, because it's like this stuff is real in the first place. Like those who don't believe in astrology are looking at the astrological community arguing over house systems, and imagine how silly that must look to those that are also like, astrology is a pseudoscience. You believe in it in the first place, right? It's like arguing over which magical creature is real. So it's not useful to get stuck on like finding the one right way. But what might be useful if we're seeking or questioning is simply ask critical questions, right? It's instead of looking from the outside in, looking through our own personal scrutinized direct experience. Well, let's pull up a bunch of charts in this system. Let's ask the right questions without preconception and observe the results. Let's explore these teachings and study and ask, like, being critically engaged. And of course, in theory, any one of us can critically engage any number of paths, but we don't. Right? None of us actually explore every single option and perspective and path out there, because that would be irrelevant to our use of energy and time. We're going to find ourselves from within our own soul program drawn to whatever we're drawn to. And we just have to trust that. We just have to be sincere about that. So we're just going to follow our call, our draw. And we're going to have to be okay with some level of ambiguity. There's always going to be some level of ambiguity. In fact, that's honesty. There are questions that we're not going to be able to answer. And that doesn't mean we can't grow and continue on this path of learning and growth and even teaching and sharing. It simply means we recognize we're never going to be able to apprehend all of it. It's another way of saying that through the Gemini logical faculties, there's no way to logically piece together all of existence. And we can't go deeply along any particular pathway of study and learning and arrive at the entirety of existence, at full coherent understanding of it all. And that isn't the point. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look at some of the core themes of this Jupiter in Gemini transit. So here, Jupiter enters Gemini May 25th, and let's just progress it month by month and take a short overview of what's going on here. Begins with a very powerful trine to Jupiter, with Mercury also soon to join Jupiter just like a couple weeks or so after Jupiter enters Gemini. So this itself says towards the latter half of this month, there's a lot and into the next as Jupiter actually moves into an exact trine. This is at 1 degree. A few days into June. A lot of insight. This is like kind of getting to the bottom line of, how are we limited in our perspective? Where can we see more of the picture? Where can we expand and open to greater and deeper insight that will reveal more of our hidden psychology? If we're open and sincere and just really willing to converse, think, ask, and follow our intuition and the synchronicities towards the people, conversations, learning, content that we're drawn to, I think this is a very rich and expansive period of time. Again, it's even further as, just after Jupiter trines this Pluto, Mercury joins the next day, okay? So the first week of June really is just rich. End of May, first week of June, really, really rich. So let's progress this even further. Now, what's really interesting is by the time we get to July or so, Jupiter will be squaring Saturn for literally an entire year. Right? Because Saturn's now retrograde in Pisces. Jupiter goes all the way up to 21, 22 degrees and goes retrograde towards the end of this year in the fall or in the spring if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But it stays because of retrograde movement. They all stay in a square of each other pretty tightly. Like we're in January, Saturn's 14, Jupiter's 12, right? Then once Jupiter goes direct in March, it's going to continue to square Saturn all the way through their movement into the cardinal signs of Aries and Cancer. Look at that. They're still squaring each other in July in Cancer and Aries. So that Jupiter-Saturn square is really rich, really significant. And there's another dimension here. Towards the end of Jupiter's time, it will square Neptune as well, and also square the nodal axis of the moon, right? This is all happening next year, okay? So this year, the highlight is this Jupiter-Pluto, and then also this Jupiter square Saturn for much of this year. And then next year, we have the Neptune, and we have the square to the nodes. That is exciting. I mean, this tells me that this next year of Jupiter in Gemini is incredible. I mean, these transits are just incredibly rich, very deep, very insightful, very much I never thought I would be here getting on the plane going to this place. A dimension of perspective and insight that's beyond what we could actually map if we're walking this journey with a quality of open-mindedness and sincerity. Okay. Thank you for watching this video. As always, I'm available for one-on-one sessions, couples and individuals, and long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions. And I have a number of classes and courses and series available on my classes page. And I begin my new Neptune series this coming Monday. I just completed my Pluto aspect series, and you can see the playlist for that, where I went through Pluto in aspect to every planet. And I'm going to be doing a free YouTube live every Monday at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific for the next several weeks with Neptune. So it's open for all. I hope you will join me there. Thank you for watching.